Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going way back to 1990
Oh,
to a
yeah.
tragedy that shook New York City, the Happy Land Social Club fire.
Right.
We've got a lot to unpack here. Articles, court documents,
Wow.
even a letter to the editor from back then.
Yeah.
Really powerful stuff.
I can imagine.
So what are we trying to do today?
Yeah. Good question.
Well, it's not just about what happened.
Right.
It's about why it mattered
Mm-hmm.
and what it can still teach us today.
It really hits on so many levels. Immigration, city life back then,
Mm-hmm.
and the just devastating consequences of domestic violence.
Yeah,
It really shows how one person's actions can
Yeah.
ripple out and impact a whole community.
it's true. And these social clubs,
Yeah.
they were more than just a place to have a drink for a lot of immigrants.
Yeah.
They were like a lifeline, a
Oh.
place to connect,
Right.
find support,
Mm-hmm.
even just speak their language and feel like they belonged.
Exactly. Imagine coming to a new country.
It must be so hard.
Everything's different. You might not speak the language that well.
Right.
These clubs were like a haven, a taste of home,
That makes sense.
a real safety net.
So important.
That's why, to really understand this tragedy,
Yeah.
we need to understand the role these clubs played.
And the sources we have, they really paint a picture of that.
Oh,
They talk about these gatherings, music, dancing, a real sense of
That's
community.
so amazing.
But then there's this other side,
Uh-oh.
a darker side that comes out, clubs operating under the radar,
Oh,
cutting corners on safety just to make more money.
wow.
No sprinklers, blocked exits, way too many people crammed in.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It really is.
It's that mix of social need and the lack of oversight that
Right.
makes the Happy Land fire so complicated.
Yeah.
The sources show there were a bunch of complaints.
Oh, really?
Even a time when they shut the club down temporarily,
Wow.
but it kept operating.
That's so
It
frustrating.
makes you wonder if the city was just turning a blind eye to these dangerous conditions.
Like a ticking time bomb,
I do
just
think-
waiting to go off.
And tragically, that's what happened
Yeah.
because of one man, Julio Gonzalez.
Right.
Driven by rage and wanting revenge against his ex-girlfriend,
Oh, wow.
who worked at the club.
Jeez.
He set the fire that killed 87 innocent people.
It's just awful.
This is where this story takes a really dark turn.
Yeah.
What Gonzalez did, it wasn't just random arson.
No.
It came from domestic violence,
I see.
his possessiveness, his threats.
Wow.
And finally, setting the fire
So sad.
shows how devastating these abusive relationships can be.
The sources really capture the horror of that night.
Yeah.
People trapped inside, the smoke,
Oh, God.
the panic,
Oh,
firefighters trying desperately to reach them.
just terrible.
It's really hard to read.
I bet.
And what's really striking is the contrast.
Yeah.
Just before the fire,
Yeah.
people were celebrating,
Yeah.
having fun,
Right.
no idea what was about to happen.
It's chilling.
It really makes you think about how quickly life can change,
It does.
how fragile it all is.
And then the aftermath,
Yeah.
families dealing with the grief.
Unbearable.
The money problems from losing loved ones.
Right.
Who were often the ones supporting their families.
Yeah.
The long, drawn-out legal battles trying to get justice.
So much to deal with.
The sources really show how this one horrific event had these ripple effects.
It's interesting how the media back then focused on different things.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Some on the building code violations,
Right.
others on Gonzalez being an immigrant.
Mm.
But this letter to the editor in the New York Times
Yeah.
makes a really good point.
What's that?
A key part of the story was the domestic violence angle.
Right.
This wasn't just about building codes.
No.
It was about a man choosing violence to control and hurt someone.
Absolutely.
And that choice
Yeah.
had consequences that went way beyond his intended target.
Absolutely.
It affected so many families
It did.
and left a scar on the entire community.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder that we
Yeah.
can focus on the legal stuff, the logistics,
Yeah,
but we can't forget the human cost.
right.
The Happy Land fire wasn't just a news story.
No,
It was a tragedy that destroyed real lives.
that's so true.
And it still casts a long shadow today.
Now, let's take a closer look at what Gonzalez did.
Okay.
The sources go into his confession, his attempts to claim he was insane,
Wow.
and how indifferent he seemed when they arrested him.
That's chilling.
It really is.
Yeah. What's interesting is what was going on in Gonzalez's head. He admitted to setting the fire,
Right.
but he said he didn't mean for it to be so destructive.
Really?
So that raises the question,
Yeah.
what was his state of mind?
Right.
Did he plan this out beforehand?
Hmm.
The sources say alcohol was definitely involved,
Yeah.
But how much did it fuel his anger?
It's hard to know for sure.
It is.
I mean, he clearly wanted to hurt someone,
Right.
but did he really understand what could happen?
It's almost like he wasn't connected to the reality of what he was doing,
That's scary.
which in some ways
Hmm.
makes it even more disturbing,
It does.
that kind of disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
We see it a lot with people who are violent.
Oh, really?
They downplay things, blame others, make excuses.
Right.
It's a way to deal with the guilt and shame,
I guess that makes sense.
but it also shows how dangerous they can be.
Oh, so.
If they can convince themselves they're not really responsible,
Yeah.
it becomes easier to do it again.
And the trial itself,
Yeah.
as you said,
Yeah.
became about more than just whether Gonzalez was guilty.
Right.
The judge actually said that many people were to blame,
Wow.
not just Gonzalez.
That's a big statement.
And he specifically mentioned the city failing to enforce those safety rules.
That's a crucial point.
It is,
While Gonzalez was definitely accountable,
yeah.
the judge was acknowledging this bigger picture,
Hmm.
a system failure that played a part in the tragedy.
Right.
It wasn't just about one person messing up. Accountability had to go further than that.
It makes you wonder,
What's that?
who else should bear the weight of this?
Yeah, that's the question.
The landlord who ignored safety concerns,
Right.
city officials who didn't enforce the regulations.
It's this tangled web of responsibility.
And that complexity
Yeah,
often makes these cases so hard.
absolutely.
It's easy to just focus on the person who committed the crime.
Right.
But this case,
Yeah.
like so many others,
Mhm.
shows there's this wider picture we can't ignore.
Exactly.
Systemic issues,
Right.
societal norms, individual choices.
All of it coming together to
Uh-huh.
create the conditions for something like this to happen.
And the Happy Land fire wasn't an isolated incident.
Right.
The sources talk about a long history of similar tragedies,
I bet.
often in places where safety regulations are overlooked.
We're completely ignored.
It's sobering.
It is.
How many of these tragedies could have been prevented
Yeah.
with the right safety measures in place?
It really underscores the need to be vigilant
Yeah.
from both the authorities
Right.
and individuals.
Right.
We can't afford to be complacent about safety,
No.
especially in public spaces.
And speaking of which,
Yeah.
the sources mention that Mayor Dinkins,
Right.
he ordered inspections of all the active social clubs in the city.
After the fire.
Yeah, immediately after.
Like, it
Yeah.
took this massive loss of life
It did.
to finally get them to do something.
It's sad but true.
Unfortunately, that's a pattern we see a lot.
Okay.
It takes a tragedy of this magnitude
Right.
to expose these systemic failures
Yeah.
and force real change.
I guess it's good that the city took action in this case.
It is.
But it's also a stark reminder
Of what?
of the human cost of inaction.
You're right.
It's heartbreaking to think
Yeah.
that those 87 lives might have been saved
A tough thought.
if those safety regulations had been enforced earlier.
Absolutely. It emphasizes the need to be proactive,
Yeah.
to have a culture of safety
Mhm.
that focuses on prevention
Right.
rather than just reacting after something terrible happens.
You shouldn't have to wait for tragedies
Yo.
to address potential hazards.
You're absolutely right.
It's easy to get caught up
And what?
in the legal stuff and the broader societal issues.
Yeah.
But the sources do a great job
What's that?
of bringing us back to the human element of this tragedy.
Right.
They share personal stories of the victims,
So important.
reminding us that they weren't just numbers.
Oh,
They were real people
yeah.
with families, dreams, futures.
Those personal stories, they're absolutely vital. They make the tragedy real in a way that statistics just can't.
Yeah.
They remind us of the individual lives that were lost
Hmm.
and the impact on their loved ones.
I was particularly touched by the story of Nicholas Zapata.
Oh, yeah.
He worked in construction
Wow.
and sent most of his money back home to his family in Honduras.
That's amazing. He was just trying to build a better life
Yeah.
for himself and his loved ones.
His story,
Yeah.
and so many others like his,
Right.
represent the hopes and struggles of so many immigrants
Yeah.
who come here looking for a better life.
Exactly.
It's a harsh reminder that those dreams could be shattered in an instant.
But it brings up another important point.
What's that?
These tragedies,
Yeah,
they often hit marginalized communities the hardest.
that's true.
The sources point out
Yeah.
that many in the Honduran community in the Bronx
Right.
felt excluded from mainstream American
It's
culture
understandable.
and relied on places like Happy Land
Right.
for connection and support.
Makes sense. That's a crucial observation.
It is.
Marginalization and vulnerability,
Yeah.
they often go together.
Yeah.
When communities don't have access to resources,
Mhm.
support systems, or a
Right.
sense of belonging,
Yeah.
they become more susceptible to exploitation and harm.
And in this case,
That vulnerability played a direct role in the tragedy.
yeah. How so?
The lack of safe, regulated spaces for the Honduran community meant they had to gather in places like Happy Land,
Right.
where their safety was compromised.
Exactly. That's why it's so important
Yeah.
to address not just the immediate causes of these tragedies,
That's the fire itself.
but also the underlying social and economic factors.
Others contribute to them.
We need to work towards a society
Yeah.
where everyone has equal access
Mhm.
to opportunity, safety, and a sense of belonging.
The sources also talk about the financial struggles
Oh, yeah.
the victims' families faced afterwards.
That's right.
Many lost their primary breadwinners,
Right.
leaving them in really tough situations.
The economic impact of these tragedies
Mhm.
is often overlooked.
It is.
Families aren't just dealing with the emotional devastation
Of course.
of losing a loved one,
No.
but also the financial burden.
What?
Funeral costs, lost income,
What?
navigating legal battles. Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
And to make things worse,
Yeah.
the settlement they eventually got
Right.
was much less than what they initially asked for.
Oh, wow.
It feels like they were victimized twice.
I see what you mean.
First by Gonzalez's actions,
Right.
and then by a system
Yeah.
that doesn't seem to value their losses.
That disparity
Yeah.
between the money they received
Mhm.
and the true cost of their losses.
It's a big problem.
It is. It raises questions
Yeah.
about how we as a society value human life
Right.
and whether our legal systems can
Yeah.
truly deliver justice.
For those who have suffered such a profound loss,
It's a tough question,
it is.
but grapple with.
But even with all the complexity and frustration,
Right.
the sources also highlight examples of resilience
That's good to hear.
and community support.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
The annual vigils,
Right.
the creation of the community center in honor of the victims.
It shows their strength and
Yeah.
their determination to find meaning. Yeah.
In the face of unimaginable loss,
Yeah.
yeah, those acts of remembrance and solidarity,
Yeah.
they're so powerful.
They really are.
They honor the victims,
Mhm.
but they also,
Yeah.
they help the community heal and stay strong.
It shows
Yeah.
even after something this awful,
Right.
there's still so much compassion
Yeah.
and this determination to keep going.
It speaks to the
Yeah.
resilience of the human spirit.
It really does.
It'd be easy to give in to despair after a loss like this.
I can't imagine.
But instead,
Yeah.
the community turned their grief into action,
It's inspiring.
creating something positive
Mm.
out of something so painful.
And it shows how important community is
Right.
after this tragedy.
Yeah,
People came together
he did.
to support each other,
Right.
grieve together,
Mm-hmm.
and rebuild.
That shared sense of purpose
Yeah.
can be incredibly powerful.
It
Healing.
There's this detail in the sources.
Yeah.
I found it really chilling.
What's that? Gonzalez actually went back to the club
No.
while it was burning
Oh, wow.
and watched the firefighters try to put out the fire.
It's hard to understand.
It is.
What would make someone do that?
It's disturbing.
It really is.
It's like he was detached,
Yeah.
like he didn't feel any remorse.
Right.
Hard to grasp.
It is.
But some people might say it's a sign of mental instability,
Yeah, I could see that.
while others might see it as callous indifference.
To the suffering he caused.
Right.
It's a complicated and unsettling
Yeah.
side of him.
And then there's
Yeah.
his attempt to use the insanity defense at trial.
Yeah.
Was he really delusional?
Hmm.
Or was it just a legal strategy?
The insanity defense.
Yeah,
It's always controversial.
it is.
Brings up big
All
questions
kinds of questions.
about free will, responsibility,
Mhm.
the nature of mental illness.
Right, in Gonzalez's case,
Yeah.
the jury didn't buy it.
Didn't.
They found him guilty
Right.
on all 87 counts of murder.
Yeah.
And I think they were right to do so.
Oh, yeah.
What he did was deliberate,
Mm-hmm.
even if it was fueled by rage and alcohol.
Right.
He knew what he was doing,
Yeah.
and he chose to set that fire.
That element of choice,
Yeah.
it's so important.
It is.
It's important to understand
Mm.
what leads to violence,
Right.
but we also have to hold people accountable
Correct.
for their actions.
Absolutely. The Happy Land fire was a tragedy,
It was.
but it was also a crime.
Right.
And Gonzalez was rightly held responsible.
For the devastation he caused.
Before sentencing,
Yeah.
the judge actually talked about the bigger picture.
He did.
He mentioned the violations of the building and fire codes
Right.
that contributed to the loss of life.
It sounds like the judge was saying that the blame didn't rest solely on Gonzalez.
Exactly. He was recognizing
Yeah.
this idea of shared responsibility.
Mhm.
It's interesting.
You know-
Gonzalez setting the fire was the direct cause. But the unsafe conditions
Right.
and the city not enforcing regulations
Mhm.
created an environment
Yeah.
where this kind of tragedy was possible.
It shows how
Yeah.
multiple failures can come together
Right.
to create the conditions for disaster.
It's a complex web of culpability.
It is.
But in the end,
Yeah.
it was Gonzalez's choice to set the fire
Right.
that sealed the fate.
Of those 87 victims.
Exactly. There might be systemic failures, societal issues
Mm.
that contribute to the circumstances,
Yeah.
but it often comes down to an individual's decision to act,
Right.
to choose violence.
That triggers those devastating consequences.
The sources also touch on
Yeah.
the divisions in American culture back then.
Right. Around immigration and public safety.
It seems like these tragedies
Yeah.
often expose those existing fault lines.
It's true. These events, they
Yeah.
can be like a mirror,
Interesting.
reflecting back our biases,
Yeah.
prejudices,
Hmm.
societal inequalities.
The Happy Land fire.
Yeah.
It sparked all these debates.
About what?
Immigration,
Mm.
poverty,
Right.
the government's responsibility to protect people,
Everyone.
regardless of their background.
A conversation that's
Uh,
unfortunately still relevant today.
Absolutely. Issues of social justice,
Yeah.
equity, inclusion, they're still so important.
They are.
The Happy Land fire
Yeah.
reminds us
Of what?
that these conversations matter
They do?
and that we need to address
Yeah.
the systemic issues
Right.
that make people vulnerable.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this tragedy,
Yeah.
what do you think is the most important thing to take away from all of this?
For me, it's how connected everything is.
Connect.
Individual choices
Right.
and systemic factors.
Yeah,
Gonzalez's actions were horrific,
they were.
but we can't ignore
I-
the safety violations,
Right.
societal inequalities,
Mhm.
the complexities of domestic violence,
It's a powerful reminder
Yeah.
that we have to address these issues
Yeah.
on both levels.
individual and systemic.
If we really want to prevent future tragedies,
It's a call to action for all of us
I agree.
to be more aware, more
Mhm.
compassionate,
Yes,
more engaged
absolutely.
in creating a world.
Where tragedies like this are less likely to happen.
Because ultimately,
Yeah.
it's through collective action,
Right.
through a shared commitment,
To justice, safety, and compassion.
that we can create a better future for everyone.
I completely agree.
The Happy Land Social Club fire,
Yeah,
it was a story of unimaginable loss,
it was.
but it also shows the resilience of a community
Mm-hmm.
and the strength of the human spirit
Absolutely.
as you go about your day.
Yeah.
Think about how you can contribute.
To a world where these kinds of tragedies happen less and less.
Even small acts of kindness,
Right.
awareness, advocacy,
Mm.
they can make a difference.
It can.
Remembering these stories
Yeah.
and facing the difficult truths they reveal.
It's so important.
It is. By learning from the past,
Right.
we can work together.
To create a world
Yeah.
where everyone feels safe, supported, and valued.
That's our deep dive for today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
That